Finance and Administrative Activities, 2017-0296, Department of Finance. Mr. Grant Duson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight for the Finances Report, we're going to have our auditors, CRI, Ms. Kathleen Zuniga and Philip Rebo, discuss the results from our 2016 audit.
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Zuniga. I'm an audit partner with Carr, Riggs & Ingram, and with me is Philip Rebo, who's the lead client service partner. I'm going to just cover brief. As you know, you're required to have an audit of your financial statements, an audit of your federal awards program. Your year end is December 31, and it's required to be submitted, the audit, to the Louisiana Legislative Auditor by June 30 of that following year. So we issued our audit report, and it's dated June 27th. We had an unmodified opinion on that report, which means you had a clean opinion on the single audit or of the federal awards. We had no compliance findings over those programs. We had no internal control findings either. Essentially, you received a clean audit on your single audit as well. You did have one compliance finding related that's required to be reported in accordance with government auditing standards in that report related to a Louisiana legislative law that requires you to report when you have programs that have expenditures or revenues that exceed 5% of your budget. And so this year it's a relatively small finding, but the legislative auditor doesn't really have a materiality. We're required to include it in the report. And it was a failure to amend a budget and it was actually a new program, the Flood Protection Fund this year, that the expenditures exceeded 5%. And what it happens is it was really kind of an administrative oversight. You're supposed to, as soon as you know you're going to exceed that expenditure, if your expenses are over 5%, the governing, you've got to bring it to the authority of the governing authority, and they've got to amend the budget for that, and that wasn't done on a timely basis. So, again, a small, minor finding, but still required to be disclosed to the Louisiana Legislative Auditor. The major program that we tested, there's a scoping that was done, but we had one program that we tested this year. It was the highway planning and construction. Your total federal expenditures were about $5.4 million this year. We had no findings related to the financial statements. This audit report that we issued is also submitted each year to the Government Finance Officers Association. The last 20 years, you all have received that Certificate of Achievement in Excellence in Financial Reporting, I think, which is a testament to your Department of Finance and the excellence and the expertise that they have with respect to financial reporting. And so that report will be submitted again this year. I do not anticipate, obviously I can't speculate, but that you won't receive that certificate as well. But before I go any further, I was going to let Philip just kind of cover some of the graphs that we had that might give you just kind of some insight and some observations that we had just over some historical benchmarks, if you will, with respect to your financial status.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good evening. Does everybody have a copy of our financial presentation? I'll start on page 2, and just briefly, the audit report's 180 pages long, so basically we kind of summarized that audit report into like 8 graphs. That kind of goes into some historical perspective and some key financial indicators of the parish. And starting on page 2 is the net position of the parish at the end of each calendar year from 2013 to 2016. The net position is your total assets minus your total liabilities. So basically, net position is a key financial indicator, it's kind of the equity of the parish. So if you look at the graph here, if you total up all the net position between restricted, unrestricted, and your net investment in capital assets, for the end of 2016, it's about $293 million. That's about a $15 million increase, or about a 5% increase from 2015. 2015 is about $278 million. So that's a positive trend in your net position And you can see going back to 2013, you had about $250 million in total net position, and you're ending up 2016 about $293 million net position. So you're in a positive trend upward in your net position, and that's a financial trend that's very positive. And we have a similar graph. The first graph on page 2 is governmental funds, and your proprietary funds is on page 3. Similar graph of your net position, again in 2013, each year, 2014, 15, and 16. At the end of 16, your net position was about $107 million in your proprietary funds. Again, that's your water, wastewater, and your garbage funds. As a slight decrease from 2015, less than 2%, but that's it's still a pretty stable, strong indicator, positive indicator of the parish's financial health with respect to your proprietary funds. And I know you're going to have future cost of living increases in those funds. And in 2017, your wastewater utility system millage will generate about $1.3 million in additional revenue for that fund. So again, you should be very stable and continuing positive trends in your proprietary funds going into 2017 and beyond. On page 4 is just your general fund. As you know, that's your equity and your general fund balance. As you can see, you had a slight increase from about $38.8 million to $40.3 million at the end of 2016. Of that $40 million, about $25 million was unassigned, basically that unassigned, that increase was primarily due to a decrease in capital expenditures in 2016. And, $25 million unassigned, you're required to maintain 5% of your general fund expenditures, or $7 million, as your unassigned balance. So you're above that figure. Again, very stable, very, plus an increase, so a very positive trend with your general fund balance. On page 5, just your special revenue funds, and a very, very stable. You've been around $150 million the last couple of years, $160 million, very stable there. Your slight decrease from 2015 in your special revenue fund balances. That's primarily due to your, you had about $11 million capital outlay, I think, in your roads and drainage operations. So that capital outlay there, you had a slight decrease overall in your special revenue fund balance, but again, very stable, very significant amount of fund balance. Again, on page 6 and on page 7 is your revenues and expenditures of your governmental funds. Really nothing of significance to report there. You can see over the last 4 years, very stable. You do have a new flood protection. It's in the green. If you look under 2016, your flood protection revenue fund, you had about $12.2 million in revenue, and that was restricted for the construction of the West Bank levee. That's generated by the new 4 mil ad valorem tax. And you can see on the next page, that same green, you had about $12 million in expenditures. Jumping over to page 8, this is just your capital outlay expenditures for the last 10 years, and you can see the significant increase in your capital outlay as a parish that you've had. You can see in 2016 you had about $26.8 million in capital outlay compared to about $30 million in 2015, and you average about $25 million in capital outlay the last 5 years, which is a pretty significant amount of capital expenditures. As a further note, you had about $66 million in construction progress at the end of 2016. So again, you got a very strong, healthy capital budget. Most of that capital has been in drainage, about $25 million spent in the drainage area. On page 9 is just your long-term debt and the various components of your long-term debt. overall, your long-term debt, including your pension liability, you had a slight increase. If you look at just at your bonds payable, your general obligation bonds, public improvement bonds, and your revenue bonds, you had a slight decrease. I think to note there is that you had a $4 million contribution to your retiree benefits trust in 2016. So that liability came down somewhat. Another item of note is just looking at your debt per capita as a parish. Your debt per capita as a parish is about, I think, around less than $100 per capita, which is probably the lowest of any parish in this region, if not in the state. So your debt per capita is very insignificant. The last graph is on page 10, is your sales and property tax trends. You can see your sales tax in green and your property taxes in red. As you can see now, your property taxes are approaching what you generate in sales taxes. And I guess of significance of this graph is that, in my opinion, is that if you look at your sales taxes, back 10 years ago, your sales taxes was about, $29 million. 10 years later, in 2016, your sales taxes were about $29 million. So very stable amount that you're generating on your 2% sales tax. And, the ups and downs in your sales taxes is primarily generated by construction, industrial construction in the area. If you add up your sales taxes and you have alarm taxes, you're over 70% of your revenue of the parish. So as property taxes go and as sales taxes go, so does the financial health of the parish. You can see in property taxes, you had a slight increase, but that was mainly due to the $5 million that was generated from the new 4-mil property tax. And as the assessor said too, for the first time in the parish's history, you had a decline in your assessed value of your property. So, if it wasn't for the new 4-mil tax, you would have a decline in your property tax. So that's just your trends here again. I don't know if there's any questions, be happy to respond to them.
Again, any question from the council for Ms. Zuniga or Mr. Rebo or Mr. Cluley?
Thank you, Chairman. Was this audit one of the expanded, which additional requirements from the state auditor's office? Was this one of those types of audits?
No, this is your regular audit. The legislative auditor did mandate some agreed upon procedures that we'll be doing next year. They go into effect for 2017.
It's effective for 12/31/2017.
Okay.
So we'll be adding those procedures to this audit here.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions. I just got on page 5 on your chart, all the way to the left side, where you have the millions vertically. It doesn't match. I think that you got those numbers wrong. Like your top line should be 100 and.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're right.
You might want to just fix that on.
Yeah,
I
I
appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
got the side chart wrong.
Okay. See you.
No other comments. I just want to end by just thanking Grant and his staff for an outstanding job that they do. The audit is very clean, and financial health of the parish is very positive, and the trends are going upward, which is it takes a lot of management, budget management, and cash management, fiscal management to accomplish that. So thanks for Grant and his staff for helping us during the audit.
Okay, thank you all for your report.
Thank you.